This is the Low Level Hell Podcast, Episode 17.
I got your back, man. Forces on the ground, you are clear to escape. Fire, take a fire.
IED placers.
Flight 6, lead to 6, fire covered for next month. Captain, come around, take over trail, take a fire. That was quite a bit of fire there.
Small death, heading east, going low level.
Welcome to the Low Level Hell Podcast, a program that explores the world of rotary and fixed-wing combat aviation through the exciting stories of the men and women who experienced it firsthand. Now, here's your host, U.S. Army helicopter pilot, Brian Harris.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show, and what can I say? I apologize. My intention was to get 2 episodes out last month, and I had everything I needed to do, but just kind of life got in the way. I've been doing a lot of work around the house. In fact, I'm talking to you now from the new studio that I created. Took an old shed that we had in the backyard that was pretty much just bare bones structure, some siding and a roof, and went ahead and gutted it, put in some drywall, put in some insulation, made a ceiling, ran some internet cable out there. It already had power, so expanded several power junction boxes in there, added some lights. And talking to you now from the studio. So it's been a lot of work. Took about a week, and then of course got a bunch of other stuff going on in the house. Just trying to get some stuff done here while the the lull between my current position and when I head on up to New Jersey here in a couple months to do some flight training. So got some time on my hands. Figured I'd get some stuff knocked out around the house. But again, no excuse. I am shooting for 2 episodes a month. We've been pretty good on that, but we just had the one last month. But hey, what can I say? That was a pretty good episode with Colonel Mills. If you haven't checked that out, head on back to episode 16 and listen to the original author of the book, Low Level Hell. And he was a great guest, and hope to have him back on sometime again in the future. Got some more guests lined up. In fact, I just talked to one today. We're going to set something up here soon. We should be getting back on track. Kind of plan the future. We are going to take a little bit of a hiatus, probably around September, as that's when I'm going to transition up north and kind of start living out of my suitcase for a couple months. But give it a little break just to let me get settled into the new digs, and then we'll get fired back up sometime, probably, hopefully in October. I do want to say a quick thank you to my dad. He's a listener of the show, and it was super helpful to have him, of course, on standby. Every time I needed to ask a question about electrical wiring or setting up the drywall or any of the other variety of things that I really didn't know what I was doing. So thanks, Dad. I appreciate that. And I want to say thank you to all my Patreon supporters, because quite honestly, you guys helped fund the project. So as I said, early on, the money raised in Patreon and through all the ad revenue and all that good stuff kind of goes back into the channel, into the empire of doing improvements to my capability to do stuff, as well as throwing out some gifts to people, which we've certainly done through the Low Level Hell Discord community. And I just want to say I appreciate that, and I do want to take this opportunity to thank our new patrons. We're going back through looking at May, so I want to say thanks to Patrick Wabin, Scott Morris, Matt Moreland, Weil, Mick Cronenberg, and Keith Farrell. They're all the most recent joiners to the Patreon. In fact, we're going to be doing a Patreon event here next weekend. I guess it'll be this weekend when you hear it. Do a little DCS action for our DCS players, and do a little air assault scenario. So hopefully we'll have a good time with that. And I will be streaming that on Twitch and on YouTube. So if you're unfamiliar with my channels, just look for Casmo TV. And you can watch the action there. Well, we'll go ahead and transition into the interview, and we'll talk to you guys on the other side. All right, everybody, we're here with Rowan Ratliff. He flew OH-58 Alpha Chucks, Deltas, and MH-6s in the 160th Night Stalkers. How you doing, sir?
Good. How's it going, Ron?
Oh, not too bad. I appreciate you taking the time, and of course, the way that we met is through your son, who I had the distinct pleasure of serving with, both in training and in combat. So I'm really glad that he kind of reminded me that you had flown, because I had known that, and just it didn't occur to me. And then we were talking one day, and so I was glad that he pointed me your way.
Well, yeah, there's a surprise from the 16-year-old surfer boy with long hair and riding a skateboard to being an Apache pilot and Army officer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know you got to be very proud. And yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time in the cockpit with him. We used to fly quite a bit before we deployed, and did a couple flights in Iraq with him. Yeah, good kid. But we're here to talk about you and your experiences. So just tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you got into the Army.
Sure. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. Went to Leeds High School, actually with Charles Barkley, just of note. And I knew him pretty well, played a little basketball with him, not on the team, but like pickup games and stuff. Anyway, when I got ready to graduate high school, parents obviously wanted me to go to college and had saved for it. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm tired of school, hate school. So it was either go in the Army or I have a passion for hunting. So I considered going to Montana to a guide school for hunting. The Army won out, and I enlisted. I got a buddy of mine to join with me. So once I finished basic training in AINT, I was promoted to E2 because I suckered my buddy into going in with me.
Because you showed leadership potential by encouraging others to do what they normally wouldn't do.
Yeah, I just thought it would be more money every month at that point.
Okay. So you enlisted. What was your MOS?
I was a combat engineer, bridge construction crewman, 12 Charlie, and we got stationed. In fact, my buddy and I got stationed in a little place called Dexheim, Germany, in December 1982. The Army was nice enough to PCS us prior to Christmas, and so we spent our Christmas there. And about 6 months later, we learned that there was we went on a company trip to Garmisch, and while we learned to ski, being from Alabama, we met some people on the slopes that were ski patrol, and they said they were active duty soldiers and told us how to apply for ski patrol, which also included adventure training instructor. And so we got permission from our first sergeant, and my buddy and I applied and went down and got 3 weeks or 4 weeks of advanced first aid training and hazing by 10th group, I think it was. And in the end, I spent 6 months in Berchtesgaden, Germany, as an adventure training instructor, permissive TDY, not that close of a haircut, and skiing every day. So my enlisted time was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I went on vacation there as a teenager. That's a nice area.
Yeah, it's great.
So how did you get into aviation?
That's kind of a crazy thing. So I had a break in service, obviously. Went back home to Alabama, started college and working a job. And then, like many of us, had one of those heartbreak breakups with a girlfriend, and decided to go to Florida, and ended up going to a church school in Florida, and saw that my GPA needed some help. And so Florida Southern College was a satellite ROTC, and so I joined that in 1986. And then, of course, around that time frame, Top Gun came out. So I wanted to fly something. And in fact, while I was in Army ROTC and already contracted, I actually called the Marine Corps Air Force recruiter because I wanted to fly something fast, I thought. But that didn't work out. So put in, like you do in ROTC, for your preferred branch. I listed aviation first, followed by infantry. And my professor of military science said, when the results came back, he said it's a waste of a good infantry officer, but you got branched aviation. So there it was.
All right. So, and then you went off to fly OH-58 Alpha Chucks at that point, right?
Yeah, I went to flight school in 88, and I went through the scout track at that point in time. And boy, it's a lot different now than it was back then. But anyway.
So back then it was 58s and then Cobras were basically your choices as far as the scout attack side of things.
Yeah, and then you could do a follow-on for AH-64, I believe, but that was after one of the two, and based on OML, I believe. But I didn't do that because I had a W-2 that lived next to me on post, and he told me if I want to get flight time, stick with OH-58. So I listened to him.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was still true throughout the 58's tenure. We'd always get busted on for counting all of our time hovering. It's like, well, we're technically flying, so it counts. What was it like being an Alpha Chuck guy? I mean, what was kind of the day in the life of a Aero Scout pilot back in those days? Because the aircraft wasn't armed, right?
No, it was straight 58 Charlie, if I remember. It could have been an Alpha Plus, but I think it was a C model. I was assigned to Fort Hood, 1227 Attack Battalion. That was back when the Apaches and the 58s were in each company. The companies, I was in Bravo Company, they were task organized with 4 58 Charlies, 6 Apaches. I believe the Apaches were A models. Anyway, and there was only 3 pilots when I arrived. I was number 3. We had the 58 Battalion SIP in the troop, along with a W-2 who was getting ready to ETS. So got a lot of flight time focused on me as a young aviator. They made me a PIC, probably too early, but in less than 90 days, day, night vision goggle. And about a month later in October, I got shipped out to be an OC pilot out of NTC. Those were kind of like details. It was me as a second lieutenant, a first lieutenant, and a W-2 named maybe W-3, Brian Penley. Anyway, it was really interesting to see the look on the captain observer controller face when his pilot at NTC was a second lieutenant. So, but
yeah, that's pretty rare.
Learned a lot.
So in that sort of task organization, I mean, were you guys doing a lot of training together, or was it just kind of a clearinghouse of, well, these guys are stuck together? Because when I was, at 717, we had the Apaches and then we had the UAS. And on paper, they were in the same troop and they're supposed to work together, but they very rarely got a chance to do anything. Were you guys ever working with the Apaches, or did everybody just kind of do their own thing?
No, we were integrated pretty well. We would do troop missions with as many Apaches as we could get up. Usually it was 3 58s, with the 58 being the leader craft. The same way for battalion gunnery, the 58s were definitely used and integrated. Like at a battle position, you come up and you do battle position security around the AH-64, spot any close-in targets, which was kind of a joke because the optics on the Apache. And then you were always great to have to go do a parts run when one of the Apaches broke, which with the A models happened often back then. So
Right.
we would do all those different things. We would also, do route reconnaissance out in front. So we did work together, and we're kind of integrated, plus like some of the intangibles, kind of like div cab that went away. You work, you lived, you played, you worked together. So, we were pretty cohesive, and the aircraft type didn't separate us.
Right. And you guys were flying single pilot in those days in the 58, right?
Well, you could, but usually you had an AO, aerial observer. I can't remember the MOS. I want to say 93 Bravo, but so they were usually an E5 to E7. Flew in the left seat. They were supposed to navigate, make radio calls, especially to ground force or artillery calls.
Were they? Did those guys carry any weapons like to fire from the aircraft?
No. I mean, that's funny. That makes me remember when we went to Desert Storm. We had we all had 38s in First Cav Division at that time, and I think some people, depending on what happened, because I didn't go with my platoon, I had to go through Fort Benning, and they were trying to issue me a 9mm, and I was like, I don't need a 9mm because my whole unit has 38s. I won't get any ammo. So, no, to answer your question, they just, we had a 38, and in Desert Storm, nobody had a full 6 rounds. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. So eventually you upgraded, I guess you could say, to the Delta model, the Delta, not the Warrior. So just with the mass mounted sight, is that correct?
Yeah, when my unit deployed to Desert Storm in, I think it was August of 91, Desert Shield at that point in time, my brigade commander made the decision. He'd been trying to get me a 58D course because they stuck me over in the TARP, or the Target Acquisition Reconnaissance Platoon, about 4 months prior to that. And he finally got me a 58D course slot. And so he said, we're not, Colonel McGill is his name. He actually said, nothing's going to happen until January. Go get qualified in your aircraft. So I did, and he was right, and nothing happened. And my son we previously talked about was born November 10th, and I made it back from Rucker for that, and then went back to Rucker, and then deployed on December 7th to Desert Shield.
So what was that like? I mean, that transition from flying the Charlie to the Delta, was that pretty dramatic?
The stick part was, it was a nice transition. The power seemed like it was more available because then, like you say, it wasn't armed. So you felt like it was a much more powerful maneuverable aircraft. And then we had the AFSOs, which were the forward observers divided or provided by the artillery branch. And they were E5s to E7s. And they primarily, ran that left side, maneuvered the sight, the mass-mounted sight, called in artillery, sent artillery missions using the CPUs. And I never flown the Apache, but if for a comparison, they would be much more like the front seater, and then, in the right seat is the pilot, just like the back seat is responsible for the tree part. So.
Okay, so even the Deltas before they became Warriors were still being flown single pilot, and you just had an enlisted guy that's doing all the artillery, all the targeting, but now he's using the sight and the systems. Okay.
Yeah, and like in the 58 Charlie with the AOs and then the AFSOs and the 58D, they received a certain amount of hands-on flight control training, but it had to be conducted by an IP or a unit trainer. Like as a PIC, I was not supposed to go and let them, actually have the flight controls.
Right. But you probably did anyway.
Not that I ever did that.
No, that'd be wrong. Yeah. Well, we would give, incentive rides to soldiers for re-enlisting or things like that. And yeah, same thing. You're not supposed to, but inevitably you're probably going to. So I'm just trying to keep track. So you did deploy to Desert Storm. We got there right before everything kicked off?
Yeah. I got there
okay.
December 8th or 9th. And it's pretty funny. I just remember showing up at some replacement LSA in the middle of the desert, and reminded me of like the movie Road Warrior, and trying to figure out where First Cav Division was, and it was just one of those times you remember where there's like fires being burnt, and there's a big movie screen at night, and people sitting around in concrete, slabs here and there. Just kind of entertaining.
So, what was flying like during that time? I mean, you guys you got there right before it kicked off. So, were you guys doing a lot of, I don't know, preparation training flights, or were you just kind of flying along the front line? Like, how was that work? How did that work out?
Yeah, I actually, my unit was Delta Company 227, so it was the general support company because they had no other place to put the TAR platoon, the 58D platoon. So they were out in the middle of the desert, literally. There was not anything around, and the desert was just eating the rotor blades, both the tail rotor and the main rotor blades. So I guess they had started trying to train before I got there. So now training was extremely limited, experimenting with different type of tape on the leading edge of the blades. Just a lot of issues with both main rotor and tail rotor blades due to the sand.
So once combat operations kicked off, were you guys, how involved were you guys with that?
Well, me personally, my company commander, who was a Huey pilot, looked at me and said, I think about 4 hours before we made the move north, he said, Rowan, you're the convoy commander. I'll see you when I see you. So
Oh, geez.
that made me real happy. And my aircraft took off, and I watched them fly away, and I watched them fly away. So spent about 2 days going through the desert with a GPS with a Brigade XO and 143 vehicles, I believe, if memory serves me correct, and finally getting into Iraq. And being part of 1st Cav, we were part of the whole feint or deception plan. So prior to that, about 2 weeks prior to us crossing the border, my aircraft were actually doing some reconnaissance along the border, and they were able to shoot a few enemy positions with Hellfire, but really not a whole lot of combat engagements for our 6 aircraft. Which were down.
So they were spotting targets for the Apaches.
Not really. I mean, because back then I think artillery branch had funded a large part of the 58D, and we mostly were working with DeVarty on fire missions. We did very little with the MH-64s. They still had the 58. So.
Okay, I got you. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this battalion that's got, I mean, what you're telling me is it's got 4 different aircraft in the same battalion.
Well, no, I'm sorry. So the 58 Deltas are in Delta, were assigned to Delta 227, which was not part of 1st Battalion 227. It was a separate company with the brigade. And,
I got you. Wow.
So I actually moved from first of the 227th, where I was flying 58 Charlies with Bravo Troop or Bravo Company, over to Delta 227. They had the general support UH-1s. They had the EH-60 Seaweed platoon, and then they had the TARP platoon that I was in.
Gosh, it's very streamlined these days, and so hearing about this organization that's broken up like this, it's mind-boggling. Next, you're going to tell me you guys also had motorcycles or something. So, which I remember being a scout platoon leader, and that's what guys told me the old scout platoons were made up of in the 80s. They were like, "Oh yeah, I remember when I first came in, we had Jeeps and we had Humvees and we had M113s and we had motorcycles." It was like all in a platoon. I can't even wrap my head around some of these task organizations from the late 80s, early 90s. So, okay, so you had 1st Battalion. It was still Charlie Model 58s, Apaches, and some Blackhawks. And then you guys were the special, what I guess eventually became the GSAB, the General Support Aviation Battalion, which is just Blackhawks and Chinooks. But you guys had Hueys and Deltas and stuff. So that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 6, 6, and 3. 6 UH-1s for general support, followed by 6 58Ds, and then 3 EH-60s.
Okay, interesting. And then, like you said, because of the funding,
which I think we talked about in a previous episode as well, the funding for the Delta model came from, like you said, the artillery branch wanting some sort of aerial observer that could give more precise targeting data other than, a guy with binoculars and a map. So that's how they funded the upgrade with the MMS and everything. So,
Yep.
Okay. So you got done with Desert Storm. What happens next?
Didn't get to fly a lot because, I was RL3, got progressed up to RL2-1. We came back and quickly moved up to PIC, did a couple of NTC rotations. And then when I was in flight school, I remember the 160th would come in to every flight school class and give a recruiting pitch. And at that point I said, one day that's really what I want to do. So W2, who was flying Hueys in our general support company that I talked about, he went and assessed, and he made it, and I was like, well, I can try this as a first lieutenant. So I went there right after an NTC rotation in March of '92, and was accepted and had the plan to go there after what was called the advanced course, now the captain's career course out of Rotary. But back then, PERSCOM, now HRC, said no problem. And then about a month from PCS time, I received orders to Germany. So didn't understand that, but had a phone call with the major that told me, and then kind of a heated conversation, handed over to her boss, Lieutenant Colonel, who told me I could either go to Germany or resign. So anyway, I guess I should go to Germany. So I went to Germany. Was the line that PERSCOM gave me was 58 Delta captains were short in Germany, really needed me there. So when I got there, I was assigned to 1-1 CAF Squadron, a division CAF Squadron, 1st Armored Division in Büdingen, Germany, who had 58 Charlies and AH-1s. So,
So they needed your special skills that they actually didn't need. So how much time did you spend there?
Spent just about 2.5 years. I know it sounds dorky, but I was they assigned me as a Squadron S1, and I learned a whole lot from the squadron commander, who was a armor officer. Probably things I would never learn. The unit was great. It was 3 line ground troops with Bradleys and M1s, 2 line aviation troops with Cobras and 58s, an F troop for maintenance for the aircraft, and HHT. And while we were there, actually, 11th ACR shut down. And I don't know the total squadron numbers. I know at one point the HHT commander told me that he had over 300 soldiers in his company, which is, about the size of an aviation battalion. But no, it was one of obviously my better assignments, and still trying to get to special ops though, and contacted the regiment, and I got a 6-month drop, and then PCS to Fort Campbell in 1995. So started out with 160th then.
So as the S1, which for listeners who don't know, that's responsible for the personnel officer essentially for the unit, which, that's one of those jobs. It's kind of like your son when he became the S4, the logistics officer for the squadron, and he would commiserate to me that, I don't want this job. And, I said, well, 1, I don't care. And but 2, you're going to learn a lot. And, it does give you kind of a look behind the curtain, because everyone on the commission side, the RLOs, they just want to wiggle sticks and fly, and that's great. And that's fun. But it's not until you get to those jobs that you start to see behind, what's going on. And, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but you certainly learn a lot. And I know Abe learned a lot as the S4. And like you said, I'm sure being the S1, you got to see a lot of how the sausage is made, so to speak.
Yeah, and the big part of that, when you're don't want to offend anybody, but in a ground unit, you get a lot more what was termed as night court. So there was usually UCMJ 3 to 4 days out of the week that the squadron commander had to do, and nobody likes to do that, but to do it right is something that really helped me further on in my career. I didn't have to do it often in aviation, but I learned a lot just mentoring, not just on UCMJ from him, but he made it a point to where a spur ride for all the cavalry people in the audience, it incorporated all the ground task along with the aviation task. It didn't matter whether you were an aviation soldier or whether you were an armor soldier. You had to know enough about both weapon systems, M1, M3, AH-1, 58, some tactics. We shared truly integrated during gunnery between the AH-1s and the M1s and the M3s and 58s. It was a good experience.
Yeah, when I first came in the Army as an armor guy, the Div Cav squadrons were still in existence, and that was one of those places that I just wanted to go to because it had everything, and it just seemed like a really, really neat unit to be in with all the capability. So, as the S1, did you still get to fly at all, or no?
Yeah, I flew with Delta Troop, had my ATP, and I still got to fly about, I don't know, probably twice a week. And I would try to focus it on goggles. I just remember I told somebody one day, I said, my day consists of coming in at 6, doing PT, Squadron S1. Then we actually had a little O Club in Büdingen, Germany, where we had the keys to it. It was kind of shut down. We would run it for Hell and Farewells and different events. And I forgot what we had. I think it was a promotion that day. So about 2:00, I went there, opened it up with my adjutant, and we promoted somebody, had a ceremony. I washed dishes, and then I went and flew night vision goggles till about 10:00. So I always live by it. It doesn't matter what you do, because as long as you have as long as you keep doing, what the right thing is, and, humble enough to do dishes or fly night vision goggles or whatever it takes. So I try to instill a little bit of that in my son.
No, and you did. And I think that's the challenge for all staff aviators is you got to find that time because the train doesn't stop. Particularly, I think when you're an S1. I was, I guess, fortunate in all my XO time. All my S1s were actually personnel officers, so they didn't have to balance a flight schedule. But of course, Abe and some others that were, and they had to find that time. And I always tried to encourage that too, because I was the same way. Like, I was the XO, but I was still flying 2-3 times a week. You have to make the time. And there's too many guys that I worked with or around that didn't. And, those skills atrophy after a while. So no, that's a good point. So showing up at the 160th, did you already know what, like, I guess things are maybe different now, or, maybe they weren't, but when you assessed, was it you are assessing for a particular airframe, or was it just you're getting in the regiment and then we'll figure it out when you get here?
Back when I assessed, it was for a particular airframe, and okay. It was the MH-6, and my assessment took place in the MH-6, which is mostly navigation, but I think I still got a -10 test, 5 and 9. I think I got to study about a day while I was planning my flight or whatever they give you. And then actually did get to fly it a little bit. So, now I'm not 100% sure how they do it. I'm been gone too long. So,
sure. Yeah, I think it's somewhat the same what you're saying. I know that they assessed friends of mine for a particular aircraft, but they all seem to have gone to a session and flown in MH-6 and done navigation and all that stuff. Um, so you got there, and now you're finally arrived. 2 years later than you had planned. And just kind of talk through that experience and what it was like getting integrated.
Yeah, I think it's good to, that I did have that experience as a troop commander at that point in time. I think that made a difference. Unfortunately, there were no open slots in A company, so I was assigned as the training company, XO, which is now, I think it's SOAT B, Special Operations Aviation Training Battalion. At that point, it was a company which ran all of Green Platoon and actually signed for multiple MH-47s, Little Birds, Blackhawks were all part of the training company. And to include obviously the POI or the course of instruction for both enlisted and officer Green platoons from the start to the end, to include scheduling people for SEER during that point in time. So got there, went through the first phase of Green platoon, and then which is what they call basic skills, and then was assigned to the SOATC or training company as the XO.
So went through Green Platoon. Now you're assisting running Green Platoon and some other things.
Yeah, and Green Platoon is, I think, as it still is, there's a contract, and contractors are the instructor pilots during the flying part. As you can imagine, all of them are accomplished night stalkers from the past. And so it's mostly my responsibilities were scheduling, and then of course we had a change of command of the training company. So I got to learn a lot about what are they called, ISU 90s, with all the tool rooms, and I never knew a CH-47, MH-47 would have so much flyaway gear. So actually it was a learning experience, but that was very comprehensive. While I was there, I got to fly the MH-6s that the regiment used to have. That's what they used for all of Green Platoon. Maybe they were MH-6 Charlies. I think that's what they were. But eventually they turned those in, and I think all of them now are MH-6Ms that are the standard platform for Green Platoon.
So how long were you in that position as the XO for Green Platoon, or the training company?
I want to say it was a little over a year, or close to a year. And then, kind of a funny story. A couple of slots were open for A company. So two guys had come in since I arrived at the 160th, and were supposed to go to A company. And the 1st Battalion, which owns A company, the MH-6s, lobbied to put them both in the next Green Platoon class to go to A company and MH-6, which meant I would be postponed yet again. So I talked to my commander, and I wrote my resignation letter and turned it into him. And so then that prompted an office call with the regiment commander, then Colonel Daly, now Ambassador Daly, retired. But and he asked me why I did it, and I said, I know life's not fair, sir, but I was here first. That's long before either of these other peers, and I can do something else outside the Army. So he just said, didn't know it, it'll be taken care of. So anyway, I did get to start Green Platoon, and finished up, in December, I think, of 96, and was assigned to A Company, 1st Battalion, 160th as a MH-6 platoon leader in December.
I love that story because, I mean, sometimes you have to do that in the military. Well, everywhere, but in the military, I think some people don't understand. And sometimes you certainly have to play hardball because things will change. I had a similar incident happen to me when I was in 117 Cav. I was slated to take a flight troop, and I was working in the S3 shop. And one day, it's so weird because I could see it coming. A buddy of mine, we were good friends, we still are, and he was working at Brigade, and he was slated to take the headquarters troop for the squadron. And I was at the squadron level S3 and slated to take one of the flight troops. Well, some big briefing was going on, and my buddy, he was running this briefing, and he did a really good job. And I remember just watching the brigade commander react to him, and I was like, something is going to happen here. And sure enough, the brigade commander asked him one day, was like, hey, what troop are you supposed to take? He says, oh, I'm taking headquarters troops. Like, oh, no, we need to change that. So long story short, all of a sudden I got told I was taking the headquarters troop and he was taking a flight troop. Well, I had already been a headquarters company commander when I was an armor guy before I'd swapped over to aviation. I'd gone to be a warrant officer and all this stuff. And I kind of did the same thing you did. I walked into the Squadron XO's office and said, I'm going to quit. I'm going to go be a warrant officer again. And he's like, why? I said, because I've already been a headquarters troop commander. I'm not doing it again. There's no way. Yeah. And I was like, oh, what? And then dragged me into the squadron commander's office, and then we had a chat, and then there had some other guy who had been promised things a long time ago. Suddenly, it didn't work out so well for him. But yeah, it's kind of funny that you said that story because that is a similar incident.
Yeah, there's that, kind of that point in time where you got to stand up, right?
Yeah, well, you got to be your own career manager, as they say. So it sounds like one of those instances.
Exactly.
All right, so you're finally in the company now. I mean, tell us a little bit about that, a little bit about your training and all that.
Sure. The second part of Green Platoon gets you to the BMQ level, and then basic mission qualified, and then really just a license to get to the company and learn a lot more. So BMQ usually is 18 to 24 months, and as a commission guy, you're hoping to get that 24 months at the company level. And I would say we actually, the first, actually there was a real world that took place that December. And so about probably a third of the company deployed. And I don't know, I can't remember exactly where it was, somewhere in South America. Obviously, as a new guy, I got to stay back. When we came back from block leave in January, the first trip I went on, and of course, I don't know how the regiment is now, or 1st Battalion, but the 160th, when I was there, especially 1st Battalion, did a lot of their training is usually not done at Fort Campbell. A lot of it is, different places. But we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and did my first part of my mount training with the company. Real big eye opener. I think one thing that a lot of people in Army aviation, when they think about the regiment, I think one word that comes to mind is cowboys, out of control. What I quickly learned, and I'd been a troop commander, is planning in detail and risk assessment were the highest priorities. And the things that I know, the techniques and some of the maneuvers that are done in the 160th, people might consider those cowboys, but the training, the practice, and the risk mitigation really make the difference where they can still do the mission with a lot of the risk mitigated away. and that first trip was a huge eye opener. The MH-6 used to have, may still have, the wheels like on a Huey that you would put on them, and they clip into place on the skid, and you pull down the handle.
Yeah.
And so we were practicing a hot offload, like coming out of a C-130, and you have to build up we did it at night, and you have to build up the head, put the rotor blades in and pin them, drop the wheels off, drop the pods, I'm the new guy, BMQ, and I won't say rank doesn't matter, but when it comes to the mission, and training, you're just another BMQ, like it should be. And
Right.
This one was, I think this was my first company mission, and it was in MOP 4. And I remember releasing the handle of the wheel, and the handle comes up and smacks me right in my knee that I'd already had orthoscopic surgery on. But so I'm hurting. I'm breathing hard. I'm in the cockpit. I'm about as worthless. I'm truly just ballast over there. I can't see out of my mask. It's completely fogged up. I've got the map, and I'm trying to help the co-pilot. And good thing all FMQs, fully mission qualified pilots in A company, are single pilot night vision goggle authorized to fly that, because I was nothing but ballast in that left seat. It was kind of like, okay, the mission's over, and okay, wow, we just landed. So rude awakening. It's I went from what I thought was this will be the way it is in Green Platoon, to running with scissors, because I was so far behind the aircraft. It was unreal.
For listeners, the MOP 4, you were talking about the mission. Oh gosh, what does it say? Mission oriented protective posture.
Yeah.
For a nuclear, biological, chemical environment. So you're in the full regalia. You've got the rubber boots, you've got the charcoal lined suit, you've got the mask on, the rubber gloves, you got everything.
I think so. I know without a doubt I had the mask on. I can't remember 100% if we had all the stuff on. I believe we did. And I think it was one, of course, again, back to, risk assessment. One of the two pilots had to not have the mask on, I believe, at that point. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I remember the first time I flew in a mask, and, I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I knew masks from when I was a tank guy, but there were different masks and everything. And we took off and we land in this little field. This one I was a 58 guy. And the instructor pilot says, okay, go ahead and put your mask on. And I go to put it on, and I'm like yelling at him over the engine. I'm like, well, how do I talk to you? And he says, well, you didn't bring the mic cable or something? And I was like, I didn't know anything about it, he's like, well, you got to figure something out. So I'm like running the mic boom underneath, from my helmet underneath the mask. So it's just pressing against my face, and, it's just stuck there. And that was very miserable. So I learned an important lesson to PMC your equipment before you go take off, because I didn't even know that thing existed.
Yeah, and I think we had M43s with the fan that connected, but it still didn't matter. I just remember being so fogged up. I mean, turning my head sideways and the other way, and I don't even know if I could see the fuel gauge to do a fuel check with it.
Yeah. So from your background flying 58s and then go into that, I mean, you flew quite a bit of goggles before that anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that wasn't too much of a culture shock for you.
No, I tell you, the culture shock is going from being a tax CAV pilot to being an assault pilot. And that's pretty humbling, at least being a little bird assault pilot. Maintaining formation and truly, three rotor discs to five sometimes, mostly three rotor disc. On the missions, for a guy who's always flown CAV attack stuff, that was hard. I mean, that was extremely hard.
Yeah.
And You're always trading, power for weight to power ratio. And, the first time I experienced like getting below somebody else's rotor wash, there's all those little things that you don't most of the time deal with in the attack, CAV scout world. But flying a little aircraft like that, especially once you get loaded up, that's definitely challenging.
Yeah, because you guys are normally carrying like 4 guys, right, on the rails or whatever.
Yeah,
benches.
It's all dependent. How close are you to the target? How long do you want me to hold?
Sure.
So I've had as many as 6 on there. We won't go far and we won't hold long.
Yeah.
or 2 on there.
You're talking about an aircraft that's so small. And then, I mean, you start adding people to that. I mean, that's hundreds of pounds. And I mean, I've seen, you guys land on, balancing the skid on a side of a building or something, and that sudden shift of releasing all that weight. I mean, that's a dramatic power, change that you've got to make there. So yeah, that's got to be incredible to go through that training. And like you said, coming from one community where, there's no reason as a scout pilot to fly 3 to 5 rotor discs from anybody else, unless you're coming in to put on a nice landing at the airfield. But the whole mission, you haven't flown like that. And now you're doing that in the dark with dudes all over you.
Yeah. And the standards, kind of, they're there for a reason. They're exacting. And, it's tough. You're fighting. It takes a while to get used to that, especially as, if you don't have any background in the SAW community. So that was hard work.
Were most of the guys that came into the MH-6 community, were they former like 58 pilots, or did you have lift guys come in too?
Yeah, I remember we had some Blackhawk guys, several Blackhawk guys. Good friend of mine who was a Huey guy that I was stationed with at Fort Hood in A Company. I want to say we had a couple of Apache guys, leftover 58 Charlie guys. So we had kind of a sprinkling of all. I think only 1 or 2 Apache pilots. So most of them either went to AH-6 or MH-60 DAPs.
So how many years were you in the 160th for that tour? I know you said you went back later, but for that particular tour.
Extremely lucky. 1995 until 2000. So not quite 5 years. And part of that reason was I was passed over for resident CGSC. Again, one of those deciding moments. Had a great battalion commander, Mike Zonfrelli, who told me these kind of things happen and I shouldn't give up. And the Army, the Army needs me, and that he would find me, help me out finding a branch qualifying job, which he did. Had the 217 commander, Jim McConville at the time, probably recognize that name. I went over and interviewed with him, and I went over and I was served as his S3, and then he changed command, and I was surprised at the pace of the 101st, but they did a lot of training. I think about 8 months in, we started training to go to Kosovo. I was the S3. I was the S3 for both the squadron and then the part of the squadron that was going to Kosovo, to include the Aviation Task Force. So we deployed in, I want to say, May 2000. 2001, to Kosovo with, I think, units from 5 different posts. So I had, in our unit, we had medevac, we had 864s, we had 58 Deltas, which we were equipped with in 217, and we had Chinooks, so and Blackhawks. So pretty much all Black Hawk types were part of the Aviation Task Force in Kosovo, to include, I don't even know what you'd call a command relationship, but there was 6 Apaches from the UAE also in the airfield, since we were responsible for the operations for Army aircraft within the area and the airfield. I guess you could call them attached to us at that point in time. And of course, while we were there, before that, got to experience a presidential visit and work with the presidential detail, the HM, whatever they are, that flies Marine One, Blackhawks.
Yeah.
Had my enjoyed my time as the S3. I'd learned a lot from the 160th, and was able to help the first lieutenants that became captains, and with MDMP, and how to do rehearsals, kind of like the 160th did, and we set something like that up for when President Bush came to visit, and the guys that were pilots for Marine One, extremely impressed, and we pretty much moved the media that came with the president. We also moved the security forces. I think we had a SEAL team on Blackhawks and Apaches. So that was an interesting operation. They brought their own gas. I remember that. They couldn't use our gas, just as a protection measure for the president.
Sure.
And then not long after that, the 9/11 happened while we were there. So just a different feel and perspective when you're deployed and that happens. But
yeah. So after you did your tour there in the 101st, you got to go back to 160th?
Yeah. I was given a choice by the brigade commander. He offered me the Brigade 3 job, and I'd already back channeled and knew I was selected to come back and be the A Company 1st Battalion and the 160th commander. And so I turned down the Brigade 3 job, which being the commander of A Company meant more to me than, I guess, some people would say my career, because obviously the Brigade 3 is a career-making job. But I got to go back, extremely excited. Got back there in November 2001, toward the end of November. Spent about 4 months as the 1st Battalion OPSO, different from the S3. It's like the Assistant 3. Just waiting to take command of A Company, which I did in June 2002. And then quickly got back in the saddle, got back up to fully mission qualified, which is kind of a subset of being the commander, obviously. But and then we ended up deploying to Iraq in 2003. I didn't get to go, kind of story of my life, for the first 2 weeks, kind of like back to Desert Storm. But then when it was obvious we were going to move into Baghdad, my boss sent for me. So I got there in April, and we started operating in and around Baghdad. We started doing 90 to 120 day rotations. So did those as the A Company commander up until I had to change out, I want to say, in December of 2003 to be 1st Battalion XO, because our XO was Select 4 Battalion Command. And so had a few other training deployments in different places between the deployments to Iraq. And then my last deployment to Iraq, I was acting task force commander for 1/160th from about, I want to say, February till May of 2004.
And that's because you guys were so split up. I mean, the first battalion is trying to cover all this ground in multiple places with only so much Schlitz. So you've got to have, you commanding in one area and another commander, basically, someone commanding in another area.
Yeah, my boss was spending more time in Afghanistan at that point, just based on what was going on between the two different engagements.
So I mean, what was your most memorable flight in Iraq?
And I don't remember who the target was, but I don't know. We had those playing cards with with all the different high value targets on them. But usually, working with JSOC, we would get one of the top ones. I just remember flying down a street underneath the street lights in Baghdad, flight of 4, seeing the Ranger blocking force coming in view, the building on the left side, 2 aircraft fast roping. We were going to the ground, trimming some palm trees on the way in, torque at max, no room for error, dropping the guys off, and everything right at plus or minus 30 seconds. Door breach charges exploding as you fly away, and go to holding. And at that point in time, that's when I went back to that time flight school where I said, one day, this is what I want to do. So to me, that was one of those culminating missions. I mean, there's a lot of others. I'll try to, that I might remember. I remember being the AMC. I think we had 22 aircraft to include AC-130s, some other ISR assets overhead, Chinooks, Hawks, AHs and MHs, and I was still performing FMQ duties and trying to AMC at the same time. I had a really good BMQ, but I remember sleeping. I wish I could remember the name of the airfield, one of the ones in Iraq. I think it's up at Tikrit, but we were laying on the asphalt thinking nothing was going to go on, and then it came out, and we ended up, I think there was 34 detainees, and the Chinooks were already bingo. And so anyway, a lot of things going on that one. So that's one I remember just because I'm trying to AMC 22 different airframes and coordinate fire support and everything. So that was a huge challenge, but a good one. And then a mission. Don't know if it's declassified or not, but it was really close to the Syrian border, and it was actual terrorist training camp. And it was in 2003, I think, a little toward the end of 2003, and lots of ISR. It looked like a big mission, something like the 101st who was in country would do. It was long legs for little birds. We would have had to definitely put out a FARP. There was still a good bit of shooting going on, and in the end, like we talked about, I'm probably carrying 4 guys on each aircraft. It was definitely a Ranger company plus type target with about 80 bad guys on it. And me and my flight lead talked, and we talked to the Ranger company commander, and he said, really, you can take 2 more Blackhawks and mass on the target. And so, and me and my flight lead said, it doesn't matter because, we'll never get this target anyway. It's going to go to the 101st or somebody like that. I think it was the next day. Nope. It came to the Task Force 160th to do, and we were out of the game. And anyway, it was a big it was a big mission. I think started out with 3 JDAMs, 2 pair of MH-6s going Winchester on ammo. I can't remember, maybe 3 or 4 times, and the Rangers did a great job. So that's one of the ones I remember.
Well, I think you and I both agree that you've made the right choice in the sense that when you had that choice between being a Brigade S3 or being, the Alpha Company commander, particularly during that time period. I mean, you said you took command in 2002. So, I mean, you're right there at the beginning of all the stuff that we're still kind of living through now. I mean, I'm sure that all came to light when you were talking about flying down the street with your rotor blades chipping away at palm trees. You definitely wouldn't have been doing that kind of stuff as a Brigade S3.
No, one of the other funny things was I told you I had to change out in December to be the XO, and so my replacement, came into country, and we'd been chasing around Saddam Hussein for like a month, flying all over the country, sleeping here, sleeping there, and I think 2 days after he arrived, that's when they captured him. So I just thought it was kind of funny because he put it on his OER support form.
Oh, jeez. Oh, you son of a... That's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, it is.
So, how much more time did you spend in the regiment after you changed out of command? When you were the S3?
My time was running out, so I want to say about 6 months as the XO, and then PCS to Tampa to SOCOM that summer, and got assigned to the J8, and I did go to the end of the internet while I was there because I couldn't get my boss to give me anything to do hardly. Went to the gym 2 hours a day, and actually was selected for battalion command while I was there. Unfortunately, I had some medical issues right about the same time, and that were not able to be solved. And then in the end, I had in my cervical spine 2 crushed discs and a bulging disc, and had to have surgery to repair those. So I had to turn down 217 Cav being squadron commander, and never regained my equilibrium. So selected for command a second time and had to turn that down. So at that point,
gosh,
I didn't get medically retired, but I didn't want to be in that staff position 06 the whole time or anything. So I said, time to call it a day. So with my enlisted time, and at that point I had almost 22 years. So,
Well, you sound like a guy who you weren't in it for anything other than, you wanted to be able to look back and say that you did the cool guy stuff and you got to have, some adventure with it versus I'm just going to follow every mark on the wall that's been laid out for me. And I'm supposed to go to this job. I'm supposed to go do that. I'm supposed to go do this. And it doesn't sound like there's any regrets on those choices.
No regrets at all. I had a great, I call it a career, call it time in the Army. And it's funny because the older you get, you look back and everything seems good. You remember all the good times and the fun times, but overall, I wouldn't change anything.
Well, cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing those experiences with us, and I enjoyed talking to you. And it's funny, I can sort of hear Abe in your voice, and I guess it'd technically be vice versa, but again, I do want to say publicly, I appreciate the son that you raised, because he was a great officer to work with and a great pilot to fly with. So it's been my honor to have you on the show and spend some time with you.
Same here, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity and the kind words about my son. We call him Bud because he's a third, and he's scheduled to actually go do a 160th assessment next month. So,
yeah, he told me the other day. I know he'd kind of waffled back and forth on that, at least when I was working with him. So I'm glad that he's going to give it a shot.
Yeah, well,
we'll see how it goes.
yeah.
I do want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has taken the time to leave a rating or review for the podcast. I'll tell you, to be honest with you, a couple of weeks ago, I was just kind of feeling down the dumps. I think that's the natural life cycle of anyone who creates any sort of content is, you start looking at your numbers like, oh man, I wish my growth was higher, or, you start building expectations in your mind of certain things. And when you don't reach those expectations, you get kind of down the dumps about it. But I took a look at the reviews, hadn't looked at them in a while, and I saw some really kind words said. So, things like that really do matter. They really do kind of pump us up on the content creation side. So, if you can be bothered to take a moment of time and leave a review or leave a rating for the show, it is greatly appreciated, and it really does help the show out a lot in a lot of different ways. And of course, you can support the show by going to Patreon and taking a look at the different tiers there, depending on what your interests are. We do have our bonus content on there, which is really just a little bit extra time with me and the guest after the show. Well, as always, I want to remind everyone that the comments made by the guests and hosts are their own, do not represent the Department of Defense or any private business. We appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you guys in hopefully 2 weeks. See ya.